Hey everybody, I'm Daham with the Architecture Lobby, and I'm excited to introduce Sophie, Kiki, and Vanessa from Designs Protest. DAP is a United States-based organization that, as their website says, exists to hold our profession accountable in reversing the violence and injustice that architecture and planning have inflicted on Black people and communities. I really like the framing of that. I like how it positions itself against the kind of profession and how architecture is practiced typically, and I'm really excited to interview you all. So let's go ahead and get started. The first question is going to be, what is the goal of Design as Protest? And what motivated you all to join the organization?
I can start us off. I think that the overall goal of Design as Protest is to, as you said, hold our profession accountable in regards to the practice and to ultimately find ways in which that we can reverse these harms because the famous quote of Brian Lee Jr. is for every architecture, or sorry, for every injustice, there's an architecture and plan to sustain it and uphold it. So ultimately, our goals is to try to reverse those harms or completely eradicate them.
Yeah, I think to build on that, it's also to normalize the new forms that we're developing and creating, right? So like what does design justice look like as a standard in professional practice of the built environment? Um, it's part of that as well, right? Any good organization's theory of change is that it shouldn't need to exist anymore. So normalizing design justice and how things actually get built in this country or how things are taught or how things are conceptualized.
And specifically, bringing together design professionals from across the built environments, really to like focus on anti-racist design justice within our practices, I think has been a really sort of key point within DAP and a lot of our organizing, and figuring out how we can support each other on those paths as well.
Yeah, and on that to that point, what motivated me to join the organization was the height of the protests that were happening in 2020. There was a national call made in which I believe 1,000 people showed up to that first national call, and I think we've just been on the ground running ever since. Like we've had to take some breaks here and there just to make sure that we don't completely run out of capacity to the point of no return. But ultimately, that's what motivated me to join because I saw an issue that I had a problem with, and I felt like being in this profession, I was contributing to that problem. And as someone who's always been an activist, like from the younger age, or just someone who ultimately challenged issues that I saw that were just unjust, this was my moment to kind of really start to do that work on a meaningful level and a kind of professional level as someone who has struggled in the professional field and the academic portion of the field as well.
That is extremely relatable, Kiki. I totally understand that feeling of being in the profession and knowing kind of the various kind of methods of oppression and like extractivism that architecture contributes to and not wanting to be part of it. And I think this is something relatable to probably a lot of people who are going to view this interview, who also kind of have this lived experience of perhaps being people of color and also of working in this profession and feeling they're contributing to or trying to stop something that they think is deeply wrong. So I think the second question we have is, in terms of strategy, by what means do you think architectural workers can fight against systematic racism in their workplaces and the society, and kind of the built environment at large?
Nessa, I think that's a you question.
That's a me question.
Yeah.
There's a few ways, but I do think that one of the things that we've been seeing over the years is there's been a huge grassroots movement of architectural workers really advocating for themselves. And I think that's really, really important. But I think on the flip side of that, one of the things that really needs to happen is we need to get firm leadership to really focus on the conditions and the equity of the workers within the practice. I do think that it goes beyond the firm leaders. I think this is an industry-wide problem related to how architects are not necessarily trained in business, and how we run our practices. I think a lot of times is as if we're just we're not we're just thinking about the bottom line, and the bottom line for architecture firms, it doesn't always consider the people. And I think we really need to center people. And that's one of the things that we've been talking about within the Designers protest, the design justice demands. We really talk about centering the lived experience of the people, and that we're designing for, right? I think part of the challenge in architecture is we're a service profession, right? And we are paid by clients, and I think that's we don't necessarily have, well, we can make our decisions, right? And we're starting to see people make decisions of where they're working based off the types of projects, right? But I think we need to really take a stand on projects that we feel are causing harm in our neighborhoods. And we're seeing that more and more, and I think it's going to be even more important now, more than ever, in light of lots of recent changes.
I think to build on that specifically as DAP, we have built a community for ourselves, right, of solidarity and of commiseration and of power sharing, where we can keep ourselves a little safer than we would be if we were just individuals. But I think also part of it has been working towards creating resources that actually really talk about how racism and these other injustices are embedded in our professional practice. So DAP published, all of us on the call worked on this to varying degrees, me less so. I know Kiki was super involved. We published an anti-racism design justice index for practitioners and government, firms, schools to actually hold themselves accountable and understand meaningful steps they can take to improve. So, right, like, what is the response to you posted a Black square in 2020? Like, what are you actually doing about it? So trying to actually build resources so folks can move in the direction of a more just and liberated profession and world. Along with that, this year, we're working on a project, hoping to launch it towards the end of the year, creating a series of chat books where we're informally talking about best practices, theories, wins from the field of like actually people doing this work, and what instruments they're using and what methods they're using to share it out, and to again change culture and make it more widespread and make this type of thinking and this way of practicing more accessible.
Yeah, and in addition to that, we are also in the process of updating our demands to align with the climate of today, the political climate of today. And it's going to take as long as it takes, right? Because a lot of us have other things that we need to do. The demands as they are serve just fine, but we do recognize and realize that there is language that we are missing, that there are always things to improve upon. So that is one of the main reasons why I'm bringing that up right now, that it's in the works, it's in the process, and it's something that we want to move forward with, especially in alignment with the chat books that are happening as well.
Yeah, those chat books sound fascinating. I'm gonna be really curious to hear about the future as I see those, like what the best practices that you're kind of pulling up are. Like, there's such a question. Like, we've been doing organizing like this for, in the grand scheme of things, a very long time, but you guys as an organization also now a pretty decent amount of time. And I am kind of wondering, like, yeah, what kind of maybe a two-part question of like on one hand, like what challenges, what roadblocks do exist that you think we need to figure out a way to overcome? And then maybe the second part of that question is like, what do you think of kind of the governing institutions of the United States and our profession that have flatly say just have failed us on like accounts of racial justice? You can
The
take it if
biggest,
you want.
the biggest thing that we always struggle with is compensating people appropriately for their time and their labor. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. There has been this overwhelming low-key abuse. Call it what it is, spade a spade. Low-key abuse and taking advantage of femme, queer, BIPOC people and not appropriately compensating them for their time, even if we're on the same team. So that happens all the time. And, you know, designers protest Kiki versus personal Kiki feel very differently with regards to how I behave when it comes to this question that you posed about how do I feel about traditional institutions. I have my personal opinions, but as someone who is representing designers protest, I think ultimately just going back to the top of just we're trying to hold these institutions accountable, and essentially collectively we know that they are in the wrong, that they are doing something wrong, and that they're causing tremendous irreparable harm, and it needs to be remediated, rectified, how whatever other fancy word you want to put on it, it just do better.
Yeah. And I think part of that, Kiki, too, is the live experiment that we are in as DAP of trying to model difference in our own organization. And we definitely have failed many, many times, but we're still working on it, right? We're a work in progress. So it's like part of this thinking is like, yes, understanding these institutions were never built for us and will never serve us, but modeling an other to think about and to learn from and to experiment in and building trust and supporting each other and doing the work that we actually want to be doing. And again, there's so much conflict with, you know, folks having time and capacity for this because we can't pay folks because we're not making money because we're not harming. So there are different cycles of that. But I think fundamentally it's like we as DAP are trying to model that difference as well as do the work of understanding that difference.
I also think it might be interesting for us to map how we all solve our interpersonal relationships after. I think it'd be very interesting to just be transparent about it in the future. Obviously not while we're currently or past tense in them or have experienced them. So just going forward and putting that out there under the guise of mutual aid and collective care and what that looks like and how to conflict resolve within an organization.
Yeah, and I think communication is so important and understanding that everybody communicates differently. I think that's been definitely like lessons learned internally with sort of all this organizing work. And language is really important, right? And the words we use and how we use them. I have learned so much over the last few years just working with my colleagues on really difficult topics, right? And topics that maybe one person doesn't understand as much as others, right? And just really trying to understand and come at it from a slightly different perspective. And I think that's one of the things that's been really great, but also really challenging, right? Because there's ways of knowing, right? That I have to open up my way, right? Just to acknowledge that there's other perspectives that we really need to pay attention to. And in the index that as Sophie mentioned earlier, the Anti-Racist Design Justice Index, we talk about leadership and labor, but that labor piece is so important, right? Because a lot of this work is happening in not the 9 to 5, but the 5 to 9. Right. And it's happening at a time where people are balancing their lives and creating their sort of future plans. And It is really challenging, and we have to understand the cadence of organizing, right? There are natural cycles to people's schedules, and sort of understanding, how to spread out the work, and how to ensure that not one person is overworked, right? Because that is extremely harmful, and we can be better at that.
Yeah, all extremely relatable issues that across all these interviews we've been doing around the world that people have been kind of dealing with. Yeah, how do we prefigure something better? I think this is all probably very inspirational to some of the people who might be viewing this interview. And I want to put out as a final question, what advice do you have for people looking to get involved in issues of racial justice in kind of the vein that you're working in?
Yeah, quickly, short and sweet. My advice to anyone interested in doing any racial justice work, design justice work, is to remember that this is not a silo. You are not in a vacuum. Get out and get into the ground, embed yourself in the communities first and foremost. I think only so much can be done from behind a screen in a computer. People need to get out and meet the people that they're trying to be activists for, that they're trying to organize for. You cannot help someone from behind a veil. You need to go out and meet them and learn from their lived experience and work with them.
And I'd add to that just to say that active listening is a really important skill. And I don't think it's something that architects and designers do much of, right? So I think that that's really, really important in this work because we are not the expert. We are not the expert.
Yes, my last reflection in light of everything that's happened recently with organizing in the design built environment professions is like, if you want to organize for the world to be less shitty, you can't be shitty. So you have to be a good community member, no matter what. That's organizing is about building relationships. You can't build relationships if there's not trust and care, and you can't do that if you're treating someone badly. So that's like the most fundamental level of how to build, liberatory futures.
Yeah, I can't imagine a better note to end on. So thank you all for your time. This has been a great interview.